There is a moment in life that no one else can define for you. The moment when an empath finally says, enough. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with absolute clarity. That moment is quiet. It has no drama, no announcement. It's the kind of silence that carries the weight of an entire journey. A journey where the empath has gone too far in understanding, forgiving, and hoping, until they realize that empathy, once a light of healing, has turned into an invisible chain that keeps them bound to pain. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That statement isn't just a theory. It is the key to understanding why empaths, people with deep emotional awareness, so often find themselves trapped in relationships with narcissists. The empath believes they see the wounded child inside the narcissist. They sense the pain, the emptiness, the fear of rejection that the narcissist refuses to face. And in their effort to heal the other, they begin to abandon themselves. At first, the connection feels magical. The narcissist shines, charming, magnetic, saying all the things the empath has longed to hear. The bond feels profound, almost spiritual, as if two souls have finally reunited. But it's not real connection, it's projection, what Jung described as the process of seeing in another what we have not yet owned within ourselves. The empath sees in the narcissist what they want to believe, that beneath the coldness lies a heart yearning for love, that if they are patient, kind, and good enough, the narcissist will change. But in truth, they are in love with their own unhealed shadow, the part of them that seeks validation through saving others. The narcissist, meanwhile, is not looking for love. They are looking for supply, emotional energy that confirms their superiority and significance. They do not seek connection, but reflection. And the empath, with their boundless compassion, becomes the perfect mirror. The relationship starts like a dream, but soon it becomes a ritual of emotional control. Piece by piece, the narcissist drains the empath's vitality through cycles of praise and punishment, affection and neglect. It's a game of emotional confusion designed to make the empath question their own reality. Then one morning, the empath wakes up in a kind of exhaustion that words can't explain. They no longer know what's real. They start to ask, why do I feel guilty for wanting peace? The answer is cruel but simple. They have been conditioned to equate love with suffering. Jung taught that the shadow is everything about ourselves that we refuse to acknowledge. When the empath meets the narcissist, they are really meeting their own shadow, the part that needs to be seen, that fears rejection, that proves worth by fixing others. It's a tragedy, but also an opportunity. Because if they dare to look inward, to face the fear of being unloved, unseen, or unwanted, then the true awakening begins. When the empath realizes that their compassion has become a burden, that love cannot survive without respect, that no one can be saved against their will, they start to withdraw their energy from the battle they never chose. They don't scream. They don't hate. They simply step off the stage where they once played the role of savior. And in that moment, the power dynamic reverses. The narcissist begins to panic because they have lost their mirror. No more validation, no more emotional reactions to feed on. The illusion they built starts to crack from within. But for the empath, this is the first breath of freedom. Freedom isn't walking away from a person. It's walking away from the version of yourself that believed love required pain. And from that moment forward, the real transformation begins. When the empath is truly done, the first thing that collapses is not the relationship. It's the narcissist's illusion of reality. For so long, they've survived on the emotional energy of others, attention, admiration, reaction. To them, other people's emotions are not something to understand, but a resource to consume. Carl Jung called this false identification, when a person confuses their true self with the image they project to the world. The narcissist has no stable sense of I. They have only a mask kept alive by how others see them, and the empath, with their sensitivity and faith in love, has been the perfect mirror reflecting that image back. When that mirror disappears, the narcissist finally sees the void within themselves. The empath's silence becomes the beginning of psychological chaos for the narcissist. To them, silence isn't peace. Silence is erasure. No reaction means no existence. No control means no identity. In this stage, the narcissist often intensifies their manipulation. They may pretend to repent, act loving again, or use guilt to pull the empath back. Carl Jung once wrote, "What you do not make conscious will manifest in your life as fate." And that's exactly what happens here. When the empath stops reacting, the narcissist is forced to face what they have avoided all along, their inner emptiness. With no one left to blame, no one to dominate, they begin to unravel. Their entire sense of self was built on being reflected through another. Now, without that reflection, they no longer know who they are. They may try to restore the feeling of power by finding a new supply. Another person, another stage, another mirror. But deep down, they know what they've lost isn't just a person, it's control. And that triggers their deepest fear, the fear of being powerless. Jung observed that the inflated ego collapses the moment it's no longer fed by reflection. This is that moment. The narcissist realizes that the energy that once made them feel godlike was never theirs to begin with. It was borrowed from someone else. Meanwhile, the empath begins to feel something new, quiet, but not empty, hurt, but no longer desperate. This is psychic reorganization, the moment they realize they no longer need to react to feel alive. And that terrifies the narcissist more than anything. Not because they lost love, but because they lost influence. The empath's non-reaction is a direct assault on the narcissist's illusion of power. They may strike with guilt, nostalgia, or even love, manufactured and strategic. But the empath now sees through it all. They no longer seek apologies. They no longer crave closure. They no longer need to be understood. Carl Jung said, "No one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And that is exactly what's happening here. Through silence and detachment, the empath has forced the narcissist to confront their own shadow. But only one of them can survive that confrontation. The empath, willing to face the truth, begins to awaken. The narcissist, terrified of it, begins to self-destruct. This is the final power shift, a transformation that doesn't happen in conflict or revenge, but in stillness and awareness. One person stops reacting, and the other loses the ability to exist through that reaction. As Jung wrote, when a relationship ends, no one is truly lost. Both are simply returned to themselves. The empath returns home. The narcissist is left behind, trapped inside the mask they created to escape who they really are. Awakening doesn't happen in a flash of enlightenment. It begins in silence, in those long nights when the empath asks, "Why am I always the one who ends up hurt? Why does my love always turn into a burden?" The answer isn't found in others. It lives within the psychic mechanism that Carl Jung called the shadow of the soul, the hidden part of ourselves that holds everything we refuse to see: fear, shame, the hunger to be seen and valued. Empaths often carry a deep belief: if they are kind enough, patient enough, loving enough, then eventually everyone will understand, appreciate, and reciprocate. But that belief is the trap of the altruistic ego. Because buried beneath it lies a deeper fear, the fear of not being loved unless they sacrifice themselves. The narcissist doesn't create that fear. They only trigger it. They become the mirror reflecting the part of the empath that has never been acknowledged, the part that wants to be needed, validated, and worthy through saving others. And when the empath finally sees this truth, they realize that kindness without awareness destroys itself. It's not kindness that causes pain, but unconscious kindness. Kindness used as a currency for acceptance. Kindness without boundaries. Kindness without self-respect. Carl Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain. People will do anything to avoid facing their own souls." And the empath, upon reaching this realization, begins to walk through that threshold of pain. They start to see how they've betrayed themselves, smiling when they wanted to cry, forgiving when they were still bleeding, staying silent when the truth begged to be spoken. That's not love. It's the fear of abandonment disguised as love. Awakening begins when they stop asking, "How can I change them?" and start asking, "How long have I been allowing this?" That question hurts. It demands honesty. It requires them to revisit every compromise, every ignored red flag, every swallowed truth. But in that process, they reclaim a strength the narcissist could never take away. The empath begins to set boundaries, not as walls, but as fences of self-respect. They learn to say no without guilt. They realize that silence isn't avoidance, it's a declaration. I no longer play your game. And when that happens, their energy shifts. They no longer react, no longer explain, no longer overextend to maintain peace. They understand that they don't have to choose between kindness and power, because true kindness is power when it comes from awareness. This is the moment the narcissist loses all control. You can't manipulate someone who has seen through the illusion. You can't dominate someone who no longer seeks your approval. You can't hurt someone who knows that their silence is their shield. The awakened empath no longer seeks justice from others. They seek truth within themselves, and that truth sets them free. Carl Jung said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." That is what happens when an empath finally walks through their pain and reaches awareness. They stop living to please. They start living to be fully present, calm, lucid, and free. If this resonates with you, pause for a moment. Take a breath and recognize you are not weak because you love deeply. You are simply learning to love yourself with awareness. This journey doesn't end here. It continues as a return to yourself, where kindness is no longer sacrifice, but the strength that guides you home. If this message speaks to you, subscribe and share this video so that more people can awaken from the cycle of pain. Every soul that awakens to its own truth adds one more light to a world once ruled by shadow. When an empath walks through darkness, they never return the same. They are no longer the one who tries to heal everyone at any cost, no longer the one who begs for understanding from those who never cared to understand. They return with a different kind of power, quiet, grounded, unshakable. Carl Jung once said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The true transformation of the empath begins the moment they accept every part of themselves, the weak and the strong, the light and the dark, the wounded self, and the one that is reborn. At this stage, they stop searching for the reason behind everything that happened. They understand that every wound carries a message. It comes to break old illusions, to help them see themselves more clearly. Once, the empath loved out of fear. Now, they love out of awareness. Once, they stayed silent to avoid loss. Now, they stay silent because they see through illusion. This transformation makes no noise. It doesn't seek proof, revenge, or validation. Because the empath has learned that true strength is not about defeating others, but about no longer being ruled by one's own unhealed pain. As they begin to live from this new awareness, everything around them shifts. Relationships become clearer. Those who are real stay. Those who thrive on illusion quietly fade away. Their goals, dreams, and priorities rearrange themselves naturally, not because they control them, but because their inner energy has finally come into alignment. Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, and that is the final trial." The empath now understands that forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness happens when anger no longer defines your identity. They don't need the narcissist to repent, don't need apologies, don't need justice, because they have reclaimed the right to define their own story. In that silence, something profound unfolds. They begin to feel peace, not because life has become easy, but because they no longer seek peace outside themselves. The narcissist cannot comprehend this. They still believe silence is a tactic, that the empath's withdrawal is temporary. But they don't realize the empath has vanished from their emotional world forever. No longer a mirror, no longer a source of supply, just a fading memory that loses its color with time. The empath has now become the observer. They see life with awareness, without judgment, without attachment, without control. They understand that everything that arrives has purpose, and everything that leaves carries liberation. They no longer live to be loved, they live to be real. They no longer fear solitude, because they have learned that solitude is the space where the soul is reborn. Carl Jung once said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." The empath has been transformed, and because of that, the narcissist has no power left. This is the final power shift, not revenge, not victory, but complete sovereignty. The empath no longer needs to prove anything. They simply live, stand in their truth, and continue to shine. After every storm, what remains is not the pain. It is a quiet kind of awareness where the empath no longer tries to understand everything, but simply observes and accepts. They begin to see that most of the pain from the past did not come from what others did, but from their own resistance, the constant effort to hold on to what was meant to be released. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist persists." When the empath stops resisting, pain starts to lose its power, not because they forget, but because they no longer react in the same old way. They stop being pulled into other people's emotional games. They stop needing to prove who is right or wrong. Instead, they learn a new skill, conscious silence. Not the silence of suppression, but the silence of strength, where they choose not to react, not to defend, not to explain. Silence is no longer emptiness. It becomes the language of inner power. Within that silence, they begin to hear what was once drowned out by noise, the voice of intuition, the voice of wisdom, and most importantly, their own voice. The empath realizes that for years they've been stuck in a one-sided dialogue, one side that never listened and another that kept explaining. Now they choose to stop, not out of pride, but because stillness, chosen consciously, is the highest form of dignity. They discover that their silence is no longer a sign of pain, but a declaration of freedom. Not silence out of fear, but silence because there is nothing left to prove. Carl Jung once wrote, "The one who looks within no longer fears the world. That is who the empath becomes." They no longer need to win arguments because they have won the dialogue within themselves. They understand that when the inner world is steady, nothing outside can shake it. What terrifies the narcissist is not distance, but the calm of the one who was once broken. Because calm is something they cannot control, and peace is something they cannot destroy. The empath no longer reacts out of emotion. They respond with clarity. They no longer let others' chaos dictate their state. They have become the master of their own inner world. And from that stillness, a new kind of strength begins to form, the strength of presence. No need to speak, no need to prove, no need to perform. Just the quiet stability of being fully aware. And that awareness alone transforms everything around them. This is not the end. It is the rebirth of consciousness, where the empath no longer lives to react, but to be fully present with themselves. At this stage of the journey, the empath no longer strives to become anyone. They no longer chase ideals or try to be the good one in everyone's story. They simply return to their original state of being, unmasked, unedited, unafraid. Carl Jung once said, "Individuation is the process of becoming the person you were meant to be from the beginning." That is exactly what unfolds here. After years of living for others, the empath finally realizes that freedom is not found in being loved, but in being authentic and at peace with it. They no longer seek love to fill a void. They love because that is their nature. But now that love no longer pours outward uncontrollably, it radiates from a grounded center within. They know their limits. They know what belongs to them and what doesn't. They no longer try to heal everyone because they understand that every soul must take responsibility for its own evolution. They can listen, They can accompany, but they no longer trade their peace to save someone else. This is not coldness. It is mature love, a love that doesn't need to prove itself, that simply exists, clear, steady, without possession or submission, without fear. And from that state, a deep calm emerges. They look at the world with the eyes of someone who has walked through darkness and knows that light was never waiting at the end of the tunnel. It was inside them all along, in the very place that once hurt the most. When they reach this level, old reflexes fade away. No more need to explain, no more desire to be understood. They become emotionally independent, no longer pulled by others' turbulence, no longer wounded by what lies outside their control. Jung once wrote, "He who has control over his own mind no longer fears the world." That is what the empath embodies now. They need no armor, no defenses. Their strength comes from inner clarity, the ability to face everything without being consumed by it. And here lies the paradox. The moment they stop trying to control life, everything begins to flow in harmony. Because they've learned how to coexist with their shadow instead of fighting it. They understand that every human being carries both light and darkness, and both deserve to be acknowledged. No more conflict, no more division, only wholeness. This is what true self-mastery looks like. No one can touch that center. No one can throw them off balance. They are not emotionless. They simply know which emotions to keep and which to let pass. Self-mastery is not resistance to the world. It is moving with it without losing yourself. The empath has returned, but not as a reflection of anyone else, as a source of light on their own, steady, complete, and free. In the end, the empath realizes that this journey was never about the narcissist. It was never about winning or losing, being right or wrong, loving or hating. It was always about returning to oneself. Carl Jung once said, "No one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The empath has walked through that darkness. They have seen every part of themselves, the loving and the fearful, the weak and the strong. And now, they no longer wish to erase any of it. They embrace it all, knowing that wholeness, not perfection, is the foundation of true freedom. Freedom is not about leaving someone. Freedom is when no one can take your inner light again. No one can make you question your worth. No one can use love as a weapon to control you. When the empath reaches this stage, they begin to live differently. They love without attachment. They forgive without forgetting. They give without fear of loss. Because they know no one can make them small once they've seen the vastness within. This kind of freedom doesn't come with applause. There is no stage, no audience, no recognition. But there is something far deeper, the quiet breath of a soul that no longer fears. The narcissist will never understand this. They will move on to find another mirror, another reflection to feed on. But the empath has left the game entirely, not with anger, not with confrontation, but with the pure silence of someone who has found themselves. They don't need to close the past because they have opened a new future, a life no longer driven by reaction, but guided by conscious choice. They no longer let the past define them. They let awareness lead the way. Jung once wrote, "The one who possesses their own light no longer fears the darkness of others." That is what the empath has become. They don't hide from the world. They walk into it with an open heart, but with clear boundaries, with deep love, but with complete awareness. This is the final power shift. When the once broken becomes the bringer of peace, when the light once buried beneath fear now shines from within, unshakable and eternal. They have learned a simple but profound truth. No one truly takes your energy. You give it, often without realizing. And now, they no longer give unconsciously. They give with awareness, with intention, with truth. They no longer live to be loved. They live to be love itself. Not love that clings, but love that frees, clear, conscious, and whole. If you've made it this far, and something in these words feels deeply personal, it's not coincidence. It's your own soul calling, the part of you that longs to awaken, to break free from the cycle of fear and pain. Remember this. This journey is not about becoming someone else. It's about returning to who you truly are, the one who once loved, who once hurt, who once fell, and who now rises in quiet strength. If this message speaks to you, subscribe to the channel and share this video so the light of awareness can reach those still finding their way. Each awakened soul is a small flame, and when enough flames are lit, darkness loses its power. Thank you for walking this path to the end. Keep going, without rush, without fear, for every conscious step is a step home to yourself.